calling in from Marble Falls, Texas. I'm visiting my dad and his wife. So we've got the family bedroom in the background, not my typical setup. But, I, like so many of you, woke up with a heavy heart this morning about everything that is going on in our world. But that heaviness really did turn to a heartfelt gratitude and joy about the opportunity to visit with you all. I think that the fact that there's so many people who are spending their weekend learning how to be better campaign practitioners and educate themselves about civic engagement and involvement and making our communities better places is truly inspiring. And I do believe that there is hope. It feels like hope is a long way off in many ways, but I wanted to just say thank you for being here. Thank you for making the commitment, even if it is tough, to turn off the news and turn off our Twitter streams and shut down Facebook and just focus in on how we can build our skills and our talents to build better campaigns and elect more people who are going to serve us better. So thank you. I wanted to ask you kind of a question as we got started today. What would be on your tombstone? You think about the end of your life, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years from now, what will people say about you? And that might seem like a morbid question, but I think it's a really powerful one, especially as you're starting your careers and you're just at the precipice of adulthood and going on to professional lives. What mark do you want to make on this world? There's a story that I love to tell about a guy named Alfred Nobel. He opened the newspaper one day and read this headline. It said, "The merchant of death is dead. Alfred Nobel, who made more money killing more people than ever, died today." And Nobel looked at that and he realized, well, they're talking about me. So obviously they got it wrong. He wasn't dead. But he realized that his legacy was going to be one of death. And the reason was Nobel was an inventor. And one of the things that he had invented was dynamite. And at that period in time, it was being used to kill and to maim. And what he did was look at his life in the past and see what people were saying about him. And he took that opportunity to pivot toward the future and say, how can I change my legacy? And the reason you know Alfred Nobel's name today is because of the Nobel Peace Prize, something completely opposite from war and death. And he took his money and fortune and created the Nobel Prize in literature and arts and humanities because he wanted to change his legacy. Most of us don't get that opportunity to see our obituary in print. And so my challenge to you is to write it out today. What do you want people to say about you? Because what you do now, the actions you take now, the way that you live your life now, feeds into that obituary. There's a book called 6-Word Memoirs that I love to think about. It supposedly started with a challenge to Ernest Hemingway to see if he could write a 6-word memoir, a story that would engage people and make them feel something in just 6 little words. And what Hemingway said was, baby shoes, for sale, never worn. 6 little words that kind of make you stop and think. So when I think about my 6-word memoir, my obituary, what do I want people to say about me? How do I sum up my life in 6 words? Here's mine. She lived a life that mattered. For me, every day, I want to do something that impacts other people. I journal every morning and I have 3 categories: faith, fitness, and family. So my faith, I want to spend time thinking about my Savior and my faith and writing out what that means to me. Fitness, it's important for us to be physically healthy as well as mentally healthy. And our family, for me, that's the combination of friends and family. What am I going to do to serve other people? How am I going to impact people? During this pandemic, it's been so powerful for me to every day take one action. Sometimes it's volunteering for 4 hours at the Central Texas Food Bank. Sometimes it's just writing a note to somebody that I know is struggling. Mother Teresa said, if I look at the masses, I will never act. But if I look at the one, I will. Sometimes the problems in our world seem intractable. They seem too big. They seem insurmountable. I stayed up way too late last night watching TV and scrolling through Twitter, and you can feel a sense of overwhelming dread and frustration. But I would encourage you to take a step back from that and to look at what small individual actions you can take, even today, that will make a difference. That kind word, that extra effort you're going to put into your projects, the way that you stop from saying something, stop from sharing, stop from tweeting, the conversations that you embark on, the tough conversations that we all need to have around race and equity in this country. I think it's so powerful to think about those individual steps that we can take. And throughout my life, I've had the privilege and the opportunity to serve others. A public service has been my driving mantra, was something my parents instilled in me early on. One of my earliest childhood memories was visiting colonias in South Texas. We didn't have a lot of money, but we would go at Christmas time and find one family that we could serve. And we brought presents to those families living in one-room shacks without electricity and without running water. And I remember feeling so grateful for what we did have, but also recognizing that people in my community were suffering just down the road from me. And it was my role to help serve them and also bring voice to them and help share their stories. And so as I kind of progressed throughout my life, I found opportunities in political life. And I worked on my first campaign when I was 19. I was a finance director of a congressional campaign in the 96 election cycle. I got sparked, got that campaign spark early on, that desire for political engagement, involvement that so many of you have already and are working to build on. And you heard from people that I spent time in Washington, D.C., working in the administration, working in Congress. And then yes, in the 2018 election cycle, I ran for Congress myself. I thought it was important to jump into the arena. It's important to be in the arena, not throwing rocks from the sidelines, but to be a participant. And that's why I applaud each of you today for being a participant. It is so important that we funnel our energy, funnel our frustration, funnel that anger that some people feel into something positive and constructive. And I think campaigns are an important way for us to change our political dynamic, for us to change our world. So again, I applaud you for being here. I wanted to read two different quotes. I mentioned the Mother Teresa one. Another quote that sticks out to me in these times is by Gandhi. We've all heard it, but he says, be the change you want to see in the world. If you don't like what you're seeing, be active and engage. Volunteer, support others, get involved in campaigns, encourage others to be involved. There is so much that you as an individual can do. Don't ever let anybody tell you that because you're young, you can't make a difference. Every action you take now has ripple effects, and it will build on your life moving forward. So when you look ahead to that future, when you are at your deathbed and people are talking about you and the life you led, what are they going to say? The things you are doing now will feed into that. And I want you to feel empowered and encouraged by that. I want you to feel that you have agency, that you have the ability to make a difference, because you do. Even if it feels like small actions don't amount to much, that's not true. They do. You never know whose life you're going to impact. You never know that kind word, that action, that volunteerism, that participation in a campaign, how that's going to have ripple effects down the road. The other night, as some of the riots were going on in communities across the country, protests that in some cases turned into riots, I was struck by one of the speakers that really surprised me. And it was Killer Mike, who is a rapper in Atlanta. And I want to read you one of the quotes that he said. He said, "It is your duty not to burn your own house down for anger with an enemy. It is your duty to fortify your own house so that you may be a house of refuge in times of organization. And now is the time to plot, to plan, to strategize, to organize, and to mobilize." And that is why you are here this campaign boot camp weekend, to learn how to do those things, to learn from some of the best practitioners on both sides of the aisle around the country. I can say that because I know all the speakers personally, and I'm so excited you heard from Nancy, and you're going to hear from Liz later on today. Get ready, she's a firecracker. But you are doing something powerful and amazing and constructive with your time. And I think it's important to channel your energy to your frustration and your anger about the violence that we see in our world into something good. And so I can't think of a better way to kick off today for me to have the opportunity to visit with you all and to hopefully share some words of inspiration and encouragement, but more than anything, to thank you. Thank you for participating. Thank you for being involved. Thank you for being attentive. And I hope you have an awesome rest of your day. Cole, thank you for having me. And I hope that every person on this call today feels motivated and encouraged to take their emotions and channel them into constructive campaign work and civic engagement. I think the best thing we can do for our communities and our world is to have more people actively involved and engaged, lifting up the voices that have been held down for too long. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. I told Jen earlier this morning that she did not have an easy task, and we did not make an easy ask of her to open us up today. And she was amazing. And I can't thank you enough for coming and giving those inspiring words, Jen. Genuinely, thank you. Our next speaker is an incredible campaign mind. Tyler Norris has worked his way up from unpaid internships to the chief of staff in the Texas Capitol. After 5 legislative sessions in Austin, Tyler served both in the House and the Senate. He's worked for the Cruz for President campaign and was instrumental in helping Senator Cruz win the Iowa caucuses, which is no small task. To say Tyler knows how to win campaigns is an understatement. We gave him a tough session this year. It's tough to make contacting voters look flashy and fun, but I have to say he's done a really good job of it and putting together an amazing presentation on some complex and intricate concepts. We gave him this task because we know that Tyler is an amazing and well-rounded presenter, and he has he is Texas politics incarnate. Learn as much as you can from Tyler. He's a wealth of information, a kind person, and is always willing to make the time to chat with participants and students like yourselves. Tyler Norris is up next, and I hope you all enjoy what he has to say. I know I will. Tyler, you have the floor, sir.
All right, good. Thanks. Appreciate that. Kind of a high bar for me to jump over, but we'll see how it goes. First, I don't really consider myself good at these presentations necessarily, so I want people to ask a lot of questions. Interruptions are more than welcome. And as we talk about voter contact in this presentation, I want you all to know it's not, my desire to put any of my personal opinions. I'm obviously a conservative. Put those forward. It's to talk about the mechanics of campaigns, the truth about them as I see them, and I want you to challenge that. I want you to ask lots of questions, as I said. Other panelists, Matt, anyone, feel free to interrupt. And we're not going to hit everything on voter contact. We have a short amount of time, and I'm going to miss some stuff. I'll probably skip parts of my own presentation. So go back and ask me about those when we do the office hours, be it tonight or tomorrow. Ask me questions. Goal is to, one, help you finish these worksheets. That is kind of our first and foremost goal. But 2, also to introduce you, if you're not already familiar with concepts around voter contact and what's important and what's not in campaigns. So we won't hit it all. This is just designed to get those thought juices going. That's what I want to do. And most of all, I'm here to help. The thing I enjoy most about Campaign Boot Camp is helping get people plugged in, Republican, Democrat, anything else, into the process, help them find jobs, internships, etc. Done a lot of that over the last, I think it's 4 to 6 years that I've been doing that. Sorry that we couldn't do it in person. That's what I like best, but it's the times we're in at the moment. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to maybe screw this up. So Cole, watch my back here as I share screen. Let's see. All right. Click present. I think this is working. Somebody let me know if it's not. So Voter Contact 101. You see my name right there. A little bit more about myself. Matt did a good job in introducing himself yesterday, so I'll do that too. I moved here to Austin in the summer of '07 to attend UT, and quickly got involved. And why I went to UT in the first place was get involved at the Texas Capitol. I was lucky enough to get an internship right before the session started in a Texas House office. From there, helped out on some campaigns after the session ended, ended up working in the Texas Senate the following session, left the Texas Senate to go become a staffer on the Cruz for Senate campaign, which started in 2011, his first Senate campaign. After that concluded, became a chief of staff in the Texas House, did more campaigns in the interim. And y'all should know, as I'm revealing here, the campaign life and stuff can be very cyclical. You go do campaigns, you go work in an office, and you can switch back and forth. That's what I find exciting. I don't like staying around during the interim. That's for other people. I like to kind of go where the action is. After that stint in the Senate, I moved to Houston for a year to be on the Cruz for President campaign in 2016. And intertwined between that, I helped out with his Senate reelect for a couple of months as that race got extraordinarily close between him and Congressman O'Rourke. And now I help on campaigns around Texas and the Southwest, congressional down to the local level, a couple issues-based campaigns for this November. I'm a registered lobbyist here in the state of Texas, and I also do PR work. But that's about me. More importantly, let's talk about voter contact, voter contact 101, and kind of an abrupt start. I guess this is kind of a literal definition of voter contact that you're looking at. And I explained the backstory before we got started. This is John Prescott. He was a working class member of parliament in the UK, kind of the yin to the yang for Tony Blair, who was a more privately educated, maybe you say elite prime minister. This guy was his deputy. He went out to do some voter contact on the campaign trail, proceeded to get egged, as is bound to happen, and made some real legit voter contact with the voter you see there. And a funny quote from him about that little encounter. All right, so voter contact. What's the goal of voter contact? Essentially, you want to maximize the number of touches, the number of interactions that you're going to have with potential voters, educating them about your candidate, about the message, converting them to your side and turning them out or getting them not to turn out based on how they're going to vote. If you're looking to join your first campaign or your second campaign, as I think a lot of people here are probably doing, voter contact is going to be your world most likely at the start. Some people join the finance team, other stuff like that. But if you're going to be a campaign worker, voter contact is going to be your bread and butter. It's going to be all you do for a year, 6 months, and collecting those metrics is the most important thing you're going to do. Trying to mix it up a little bit. If you don't know George Carlin, he's a former comedian. He's no longer around, but he has some pithy thoughts about where politicians come from. And never forget that when you're working as a campaign staffer and even one day as a candidate, it's you who are responsible for the people we elect to office. So be selective about who you work for. So before we talk about voter contact, before we actually get to the point on all of this, I thought it was important, talked it over with Matt and we agreed, we need to talk about who voters are. When you do voter contact, you're not going to go next door to your neighbor's house necessarily and knock on their door. You're not going to walk around your dorm and just knock on every door, call everyone you know. It's useful, but you need to figure out, as winning a campaign is important, what a voter is. So let's talk about that a little bit. So who are voters? You're going to see a phrase, I think, in your worksheet and elsewhere about VAP, voting age population. So what is VAP? It's people who are aged 18 and up. You got to be 18 to vote. Katja and other people will probably chime in that you don't necessarily have to be 18 to be registered to vote, of course. If you're going to be of voting age by the time a primary or general election rolls around, you can register early. But people who can vote are people ages 18 and up who have registered by a deadline for a certain election. So when we talk about 2020, which is kind of the election cycle you're probably going to be gaming out in your worksheets and as you come up with thoughts about your campaign, think about in a presidential election year, turnout, aka the number of people who show up to vote, is usually up. How is the COVID pandemic going to affect that? It's a question we're dealing with right now, and that people are disagreeing on a lot. Should everyone be able to vote by mail? How long is the early voting period going to be, considering people are going to want to stay socially distant from others? And so think about the different types of voting: early voting, voting in person during election day, voting by mail or absentee. All of that depends on your age, your status as a veteran. That affects how people vote and who turns out to vote. But most importantly, when you talk about voting age population, those are the people that can vote. It's important to differentiate between a stack of people that are eligible to vote, people aged 18 and up who haven't committed a felony, versus the people who are registered to vote, which is a smaller portion of that pie. And then you want to talk about people who actually do vote. Those are the people that you're going to talk to the most. Now, look, there's tons of merit in voter registration drives and trying to get more people involved in the process. That's what we all want. But let's start talking about people who are likely to vote. Most important thing about people who are likely to vote are people who have voted in the past. And so next 2-3 slides are going to be about who votes. And this is nationwide. This is not specific to Texas. I wanted to go as broad as possible so we could have a discussion. And I want you to look at these from a factual basis. We're going to talk about age, race, level of education, and how this affects the outcome of an election. So when we look at these, we're going to get down to the nitty gritty on who votes. So my first question on this slide is, what do you see here? You're looking at turnout levels based on race and ethnicity and age on this level. So, I mean, what do we see? Young people don't vote as often as older people. Non-Hispanic whites usually vote at the highest level. You see charts, these two charts are relatively consistent and they're predictable. You can say from one presidential or midterm cycle to another, here's what I think is going to happen based on turnouts for this age group, this ethnicity. Let's start with the voting age one and look at 2018. In midterm election cycles, aka when a presidential candidate is not on the ballot, turnout is usually way down. And you can see that here, and it sticks through most of the chart. But if we look at 2018, and my face is unfortunately in the way of, there it goes, 2018 for me, but voting turnout stayed relatively high in 2018 compared to other midterms. I want you to think and ask questions about why that may be. Take a look at 2018 versus 2014. Why did turnout stay so high, aka not dip precipitously lower than it did in 2016? Why may that have been? I'll answer my question before we get to your questions. It's because the presidential election of 2016 raised so much interest in politics. You had two very different candidates who presented themselves in a very different way. Even as a Republican, it's easy for me to say Donald Trump drove up turnout from both people looking to vote for him and people looking to vote against him, and the candidates that supported him or were against him. Looking factually, what age group consistently underperforms in voter turnout? Well, the answer is obviously young people. So most of the people who are watching this presentation, unfortunately, I barely, but no longer qualify as one of those 18 to 29, which is kind of sad. But take a look at who tends not to turn out, be it demographically, by age, etc. And I think a good one to drive home on how this changes is take a look at both 2008 and 2012 over on the race and ethnicity chart. Non-Hispanic Black turnout spiked immensely in 2008 and 2012 because people were excited to turn out for President Obama, and they did so. And it's a huge part of why he got reelected. So take a look how demographic and age turnout changes over time, and ask yourself questions about why it changes that way. And then as we sort of funnel down into the elections that y'all will be looking at on these worksheets, and as you put your thoughts together, how does that different nationwide than it is in Texas? What could drive out youth turnout in 2018? I'm obviously going to answer that question in just a second, but ask yourself, why do these things change over time?
Tyler, we have one question
Sure.
from our participants, and this is regarding the concept of voters and who is a voter. From Anna Sophia, if someone has committed a felony but served time / is done with parole, I would say off paper, can they vote? On that note, um, can they register? Can someone register to
Mhm.
vote if they are currently homeless? So that's two separate questions. One, someone's off paper, can they vote? And two, what if you're homeless? Are you a voter?
Yes, sure. And the answer is yes. I know that for a fact. When it comes to being homeless, you can register to vote. There's a process you go through where you declare for purposes of which district you're going to vote in, where you quote unquote live, and that's not an easy thing for somebody who um, either doesn't have a home or isn't in command of all of their faculties. But yes, you can register to vote as somebody homeless. When it comes to felon voting, I'm going to answer this a little clumsily. It's changing. When it comes to state elections, I think in states like Virginia and frankly in other blue states, they are changing the law on the ability for felons to vote. Obviously, all of that's going to be subject to court challenges. It's not something we've done here in Texas, and I think reasonable minds can disagree on whether felons should retain the right to vote, but it's something that's changing nationwide. It'll be different state to state. The answer, as far as I know, here in Texas is no, felons cannot vote. If you get it wiped off your record, that's another good question. I wouldn't be surprised in the state of Texas if you see, in terms of criminal justice reform, that'll be something that probably a lot of Republicans and Democrats can agree on when it comes to whether you call it second chances or clearing your record, stuff like that. People who have made amends, served their time, or what have you, should they have the ability to re-enter to the voting population? That's a discussion we're going to be having, probably here in Texas starting in January. So I hope that answers the question. Feel free to chime in if there's some follow-up on that.
And
Let's move on to,
question.
go ahead.
A question regarding the data points you have. I got in here via text. Are these the bread and butter? Are these the canon? Age, voting age, population, race, and ethnicity, or are there more data points that are deemed more important, or is this the pinnacle?
Sure. No, this is really broad information. This is nationwide. I pulled this data from a National Voting Project report, and the Texas Politics Project, which is actually associated with the University of Texas, will have some even more important for our purposes data on Texas turnout. So yes, this is canon. This is gold standard. I didn't come up with this myself. But it's a broad level picture that I think can visually point you all to what is happening now, and perhaps point you towards the future on what may happen in 2020 and beyond. Specifically, and I may cover this a little later, in Texas, we talk about, and the language that the press uses, not necessarily me, the sleeping giant of Hispanic turnout in the state of Texas. Hispanic voters don't turn out at the rate that other ethnicities necessarily do. If that turnout increases and it more reliably votes Democrat in this state, less so than others, but it's a reliable Democrat vote for the most part, 60-40 or better for Democrats. What does that do to the shape of the state? Will that turn Texas blue? We got kind of a preview of what it could do in 2018. I'm going to talk about that here in 2 slides. But this is just a good visual representation for people to ask questions about who turns out to vote and what does that do. So to talk a little bit more about that, here's voting population by education. Looking at the previous 2, the education slide shouldn't necessarily surprise you. People who don't even have high school degrees have abysmal turnout rates, sometimes hovering around 30%, versus postgraduate folks, people who are graduated from higher education more than once, tend to turn out up to 90% in some elections. And these stayed pretty consistent. The important thing is, again, 2018 saw turnout stay a little higher than it normally does in a midterm election. So we can ask the question about who's going to turn out in 2020. that chart number we have to assume is going to go way up again for a presidential election turnout. And then over to my right again is the white share of the electorate. Again, I'm not in a hurry to talk about race and politics, but this is a fact right here. Let's take a look at it. And look, this chart doesn't go from 100% to 0. It goes from 88 to 70. So keep that in mind. We're not talking about a huge chunk of the population or a proportion of the population, but from, time immemorial, our first presidential election to, let's say, 2002, the white vote, that's what this chart represented, dominated electoral politics nationwide. And you can see it goes up and down based on the election year, but it's gone from a high of about 86% in 1990 to the last election, it was just above 73%. So you can see who votes is changing over time, and that's going to affect outcomes, at least theoretically. And I want you all to be thinking about that. To look at the questions I've got. Again, notice midterm turnout in 2014 versus 2018. People are excited to turn out in the last midterm election. And ask yourself, very easy to tell, what is happening to the white or Anglo share of the vote nationwide? It's going down. Two specific or a couple specific elections to note. White turnout, as we call that on the chart to the right, in 2010 and 2014 was a much higher share of the vote than it was in 2012 and 2008. So that was call it the Tea Party phenomena, okay? Something that I benefited from as a Republican political consultant is that the white share of the electorate, which tends to vote Republican, if we're talking about facts, went way up in those midterm elections. And that's why, even though the country consistently and rather easily reelected President Obama in 8 and 12, he had to deal with a rather Republican House and Senate the whole way through, because in midterm elections, the demographic breakdown of the vote broke down how it did. I'm ready to move on to the next one. Did we have any other questions on this slide?
Not at the moment, no, sir.
Cool. Well, I think I got one more about who voters are before we actually talk about voter context. So who benefits? I'm going to bring in my friend here. When you see references to laws and stuff like that, this is the Leadership Institute's Laws of the Public Policy Process. And it was fun to see in Nancy's presentation yesterday, a couple of these organically made it into her presentation. As a formerly student-aged Republican, these are pretty easy to get a hold of, but these rules, these laws, and he calls them laws, written by a guy named Morton Blackwell, who heads up the Leadership Institute in Virginia. These are wonderful. I'm not a big fan of academic applications. I'm more a big fan of experience, but these 45 laws that he has in place are just beautiful for anyone to read when it comes to campaigning. And as we ask who benefits from turnout, I put up there Law 44. So let me read 44 for you. It's one of my favorites. Moral outrage is the most powerful motivating force in politics. I'll send a link around to this at the end. You can get a copy of it anytime you want for free. It's great information. So moral outrage. So who benefits from turnout? So without even talking about another important graph that I could have included about male and female turnout and who they tend to vote for, think about groups of people that turn out, and most importantly, who they turn out for. Great example of this pictured here. I worked against this guy for the last 3 months of the Cruz for Senate re-elect campaign. I traveled back and forth to Houston a lot because they had a close election on their hands to get Senator Cruz reelected. Because you had I don't want to say once in a lifetime, but once in a while candidate in Beto O'Rourke that made it one of the closest statewide elections we've had in a very long time. So think about, as we talked about, how do changing demographics and rates of participation change elections? And what does that mean for Texas? Going back to 2018, you saw a spike in Hispanic turnout, and you actually didn't see the expected larger spike in youth turnout for that election. And obviously it was the closest Democrat-Republican election in nearly 2 decades. decade. So what does that mean? How does it affect Texas? And to think ahead to 2020, and as we're at least kind of technically or tentatively dealing with Texas House elections, that may be a focus of our worksheets and what y'all are thinking about. You have maybe a dozen or more districts that were decided by 5% or less in the Texas House, in a margin of very close to that in terms of Republican control. So if we see a higher youth turnout, Hispanic turnout in 2020, how is that going to affect the Republicans' majority in the Texas House? But also, it's an important point that I drove home in the days after. Well, I guess it wasn't in the days, but after the 2020 or the 2016 election, excuse me, is how can turnout affect be changed? Who gets what share of the vote? Don't forget, these numbers can change. What different groups, genders, et cetera, who they support can change. And, more Anglo votes can go to the Republican by proportion than they did last time. So these are constantly fluctuating numbers. Be mindful about how they might affect the results. So I'm going to move to the next slide. We can interrupt with any questions, but let's talk about voter contact, what we're all here to talk about. So there's a lot of slides to go over, and some are more important than others. But here are the list of the type of voter contact. There are more. I may not be thinking of them. If Matt joins us, he's probably going to add a couple to this, but these are the important ones in my book, and we can talk about some more. You got block walking, which I'll explain, phone calls, events, digital, television, radio, direct mail, which you will hear more about in Liz's presentation. And by the way, stay for Liz's presentation. It's the best one you're going to get all weekend. It's the presentation. I've done campaign boot camp for I think 6 years now. I stop, I take notes on Liz's presentation every single time because it's the best one there is. And earned media, we're going to talk about all of these. So block walking, which will have different names based on who you are, but it's the act of knocking on doors, going door to door to talk to voters. These voters can be anyone from hardcore conservatives and liberals, if you're fighting a primary battle before March, to persuadable swing voters in a general election. So the audience of who you're going to talk to, obviously you only want to talk to voters, and you pretty much only want to talk to people who are likely to vote, just a campaign mechanic if you want to win. But the type of people you're going to talk to is differing based on whether you're working in a primary election or a general election. Block walking is especially important in urban, suburban districts where housing is more densely packed, which means your walkers, be they volunteer or paid, can have more conversations per hour. Block walking, I call it the king of local politics. Engages your supporters, engages your staff and volunteers in visiting homes with a message and printed material. And it's one of the most profound and effective ways you can talk to voters. If somebody comes and knocks on your door, pandemic aside, okay, it's a little different right now, but as we get back into block walking this summer, somebody comes to your door and has a conversation with you, especially if it's a candidate, people are going to remember that. That person cares enough to talk to me, to take their time out in the hot sun to come talk to me. I think two great examples of this are the folks that you're going to see on one of these sides of the screen. Two Texas House members, one is retiring, one's up for a tough re-election battle, Jonathan Stickland and Michelle Beckley. They're both from the North Texas area. Jonathan was if I have this right, he was an esports pioneer and an exterminator. And I believe he was either 27 or 29 the first time he ran for office. And Michelle Beckley lives in a what used to be reliably Republican seat in Louisville, and she currently owns an exotic bird store. So these are people that aren't necessarily politicos, okay? They may be local volunteers. They're involved in the process, certainly, but they weren't of the normal political tribe. They were just people with jobs. And what did they do? Well, Jonathan had, I think, a 4 or 5 way Republican primary in a very reliable Republican seat back the first time he ran. And he walked, I'll use the number 10,000 doors. He went and had those conversations in person. And so did Michelle Beckley in her general election against a entrenched well-funded Republican opponent, she ended up winning because she knocked thousands of doors. And frankly, they knocked more doors than their opponents did. They didn't have a lot of money. They didn't necessarily have a lot of campaign skill. They were both new to this, and they far and away were not the favorite. They weren't your typical Republican or Democrat candidate. But they worked hard and they won, and that's why they're both elected to office right now. And it's why they both are going to be substantial figures in Texas politics for as long as they want to be, because they broke the mold. They did the walking they needed to do. Another important note before we take questions on block walking is don't go have a conversation with a voter and not record what happened. Don't go talk to a primary voter or a general election voter and not, after that conversation is done, make some notes about what happened, who they're likely to support, and what their thoughts are. Get what's important to them and collect that data. If you can get their email address, get email addresses. If you're the campaign manager, it's what you're going to hassle your door knockers to get. If you're a block walker yourself, it's what you want to collect to make your campaign manager and candidate happy. Also keep in mind the difference between volunteered and paid campaign walking. In my book, the best thing you can do as a candidate or paid staff is to go get those doors knocked yourself. Obviously, there are only so many hours in a day, but get your campaign workers and your dedicated volunteers to go do this early and often and as long as possible, because it's the most profound thing in local politics. If you pay block walking teams, which there are state and internet or national vendors that sell block walking, it's a mixed bag. These people are looking to make money as campaign vendors. And so they sometimes look to do volume at doors rather than quality of door conversations. And in fact, you got to watch your vendors that they don't do something called lit dropping, which I'm sure Katya and others are rolling their eyes. Lit dropping is where people pretend to block walk by going to stick a door hanger on your front door and pretend that that was a contact with the voter. That is not high quality. You put something on their door, they may look at it, they may throw it away, they may remember your candidate's name, but conversations are important first and foremost. Any questions?
I've got a question that popped up. Yourself, as an individual who's on a high level in the Texas political world, when you're looking back on your experience block walking, do you have any memories you think are important to share with participants who are going to start block walking this upcoming fall, possibly the spring, but folks that'll be hitting the pavement? Do you have anything that really sticks out to yourself in your block walking days?
Yeah, definitely. It's an experience. First and foremost, it's a great way to get in shape or stay in shape. I don't think Jonathan would mind if I told this story as somebody who's worked with him in the past. He's a big fella, as I tend to be sometimes too. And doing the block walking in the heat of the summer is a good way to get in much better shape. Do that. It's good for you. A lot of sunshine and a lot of steps for your Fitbit or whatever. So do it. You'll have some interesting experiences. Some people are more interested than others than answering their front door. Try not to do it during college football. Try not to do it during church hours, whatever those may be for various people. And obey no soliciting signs. If somebody's got that sign up, it means they don't want to have a conversation with you. So be selective about what doors you knock on. When you knock on them, don't knock after dark. Don't knock in a thunderstorm. But it's a great experience. It is frightening. I did it for a candidate that was at that time in the Republican primary named Tan Parker, because I lived in the district that he still represents. And it's frightening to start off. We're going to go knock on a stranger's door and have a conversation with them about some election. Do it. It helps you overcome the fear of public speaking and interacting with voters. So get it done. You'll have some interesting experiences. Some people will yell at you for knocking on their doors, but most of them are both surprised and pleased that people care enough to consult with you about their vote. Let's look at LI's law number 42. Politics is of the heart as well as of the mind. Many people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's important for block walking. And it's just what I was talking about. If you're willing to visit a door, people know you care about their vote. And that's what block walking accomplishes for you.
Just got another one.
Sure.
Text. When do you go block walking? If not during football season or during church hours, how do you decide what day or what week to knock on doors, and what lists do you lean on to decide where to knock on doors? And you may
Yeah.
cover it later, but if you can.
Yeah, no, this is good. This is good because it's nitty gritty that I don't get into all the time, forever and all the time within reason. If you're in a primary or even if you're in a general election, there's not a bad time to block walk. Obviously, if you do 500 doors in July, don't expect people to remember who you are in November. That's not how it works. It needs to be early and often. You want to, if I have a state rep candidate, I want them to hit every high propensity voter, people who are going to turn out. I want them to hit the doors personally 3 times if they can. I want them to do 10,000. I want them to do 30,000 doors themselves. Obviously, time permits usually quite a bit less than that, but successful candidates and their staffs will do it as early as they can in the calendar and as often as they can right up until election day. Who are you going to target depends on the election. If you're in a primary election, you are only, someone can stop me if they disagree, but you are only going to talk to primary voters in your party. You're not going to go talk to general election voters because they're either not going to show up or they're not going to be susceptible to your messaging. If you're in a general election, again, you're more than likely going to talk to your voters first because you want them to know who you are and you want them to be excited to turn out for you. In a general election, you're going to also target independent households and people who have a possibility of voting for you. And you can discover who those people are, first and foremost, by having the voter list in front of you, people who are registered to vote. It's publicly available. Who they vote for. Obviously, you can't vote. You can't find out who they voted for in the past. You can tell what party they voted for in a primary, which is the most important bit of data. So you'll have some idea which door, which household, and the people behind that door are likely to vote for, and that's going to determine who you have conversations with first and most often. I think that answers the question. Come back at me if I need to get more specific. But this information in general is publicly available. And 2, you can use a number of other voter contact methods, professional or volunteer, to determine via phone call or an email or a text who's likely to vote and who they're likely to vote for. And that affects what conversations you have with them.
I've got a number of questions coming in, Tyler.
Let's do it.
Let me ask you about lit drops right now. Lacey asked, and Lacey, correct me if I'm wrong in summing up your question, are lit drops just as important in the time of COVID right now as we're still tentative about block walking and being socially distant? Are lit drops better than nothing right now?
Maybe. If it tells you anything, and maybe it tells you I'm bad at my job, I'm not sure. We'll find out. I don't have any of my candidates doing lit drops right now. I mean, maybe we'll start next week. It's going to be soon that we're going to start having conversations at the door again, or maybe start doing lit drops. But as somebody who's done this for many cycles, I'm very much down on lit drops. To talk specifically about during the pandemic, I don't want to send my supporters maybe in a shirt for my candidate or just in plain clothes or whatever. I don't want to send them to doors. I have polled Republican primary voters. These are the most conservative, most likely to be open up Texas, and Bubba's yelling about how he's being held down and can't open up his ammo shop or whatever. These are people that are more likely than not want to open up the state immediately or 3 weeks ago or whenever. 70-30, these people are still scared to death of the pandemic. They don't want people coming to their doors. That's the conclusion I've drawn. So specifically during the pandemic, I would wait a couple more weeks till it's nice and hot outside and we feel in general that we're a little bit safer from spread via contact or whatever to start doing block walking or lit drops again. Wait a little bit longer, if you ask me. During normal times, never do lit drops because nobody cares about them. But the only time you do a lit drop is when you knock on a door for a high propensity voter, somebody who's likely to vote, and they don't answer. If they're not home or whatever, if you leave something on their door, especially if it has a little note, it can be a handwritten posted note stuck to that little push card or that card that you're putting on their door that said, hey, just missed you, call our campaign number or call my cell number anytime if you want to talk about why I'm running for office. That's not bad stuff right there. But straight lit drops, the only objective being putting stuff on doors. Don't do it now. Don't do it ever, unless that's what you have the time and resources to do. What's next?
On that note, during a normal election cycle,
Mhm.
when do you start that block walking in relation to the campaign? Lillian asked, how far out before an election should block walking start?
Yeah, again, my kind of dumb, clumsy answer is the moment you declare for office. Now, look, you're going to have to, as Matt talked about, you're going to have to assemble your messaging, your team, you're going to have professional looking stuff to hand out at those doors, to have those conversations. So wait for that to happen. But there's no time like the present, especially during the summer before a general election, to start making those impressions at the door. People are, and Liz is going to drive this home better than anybody in the world, but people need to see your name, your message, your thoughts at least 7 times. Some people say 12 times before it's like really dented into that skull and they know who you are and what you stand for. So if you wait till the fall to start doing walking, well, I hope you hit 1 million doors in your district, but it's just not going to be enough time and manpower to make a big enough impression on the voters. So start now under normal circumstances.
One last question on the concept of block walking. Someone from Tarrant County asks, where do you get these detailed voter lists?
Sure. Well, a lot of my races are in Tarrant County. So we have 254 counties in this state. And if you're lucky, your district will be in one of them. And if you're really lucky, it'll be in a county that takes meticulous care to have these records available. They're not all created equally. Getting the voter data can sometimes involve sending an email to an elections administrator. Tarrant County will do this for you. Dallas County is stellar at this most of the time, where it said, hey, I need the list of voters and you can narrow it down within certain metrics. A lot of the times, if it's in a more advanced urban county that keeps meticulous detail, sometimes getting the voter list, this is not a joke. Things have advanced since my first campaign, but it's not a joke to say that you will call an elections office in not Loving County, because I don't think they have an elections office, but you'll call a rural county and Ethel, to pick a name, will pick up the phone and you'll say, how I'd like to get the voter list. And she will tell you to mail her a handwritten check, and she will mail you a physical CD that will have the voter list on it. I'm not kidding you. It's been a while since I've had to do that, but that happens. So if you're in Tarrant County, you can get it online. You can make that request online. There's a fee most of the time to get these voters, but it'll talk about who general election voters are, people who have a history of turning out in November elections. And it will also, you'll be able to get lists either from a county or a party organization, which can be important to contact as well, that says, I need a list of people in Tarrant County who have voted in 1, 2, 3, or 4, or all of that of the last Democrat primary, or Democrat primaries going back to 2012. So if you're running a Democrat campaign for Texas House, maybe against Jonathan Stickland or something like that, you can go get a list of people who reliably vote Democrat and go have conversations with those people about why Jonathan Stickland should be run out of office. So you can go get that data from either your party or government organizations have that information sometimes as well. So this slide, personal opinion time, I called block walking the king or queen of local politics. The phones are the court jester of local politics. And I'll go back to LI's rules number 4 here. It's written on the screen. Effort is admirable. Achievement is valuable. We're going to talk about this concept a couple times. You can do a lot of phone work and not move the football for your candidate. And I'll talk about that in terms of these 2 pictures here in just a second. So phone calls, talk about COVID a little bit too. Phone calls can take place at your campaign office if you have one. Volunteer gatherings where people get together at a house and a dozen people get together and make phone calls on their cell phones or phones that the campaigns provide them, or via paid call centers. And these call centers can be call centers that are normally politically inclined. There's a big business out there for paid phone calls where 100 phone bankers who get paid per call make calls in support of your candidate, or to find out information, or to talk crap about the opponent, All of that can be done. So there are very different modes, free and paid, to get these phone banking done. So phone banking, as it's often called, as I'm going to call it, is useful, as it can be done from morning until night, rain or shine, almost 7 days a week. Again, going back to the block walking stuff, don't do it at 8 o'clock in the morning. People aren't looking to hear from you most of the time on the phone anyway, so don't do it at 8 o'clock in the morning. Don't do it in the state of Texas. Don't do it during normal church hours, which may include right now if you're kind of thinking about that kind of stuff. So try to stay before noon. On Sundays, college football again can get Republican primary voters a little riled up when you call them while Texas or A&M or somebody's playing. But you can do it almost all the time. You can do it until about 9 o'clock if you want to push the envelope. But if there's a thunderstorm out there, you can get on the phones. And volunteers can do it from anywhere. Important to note, volunteers can do it from anywhere. I spent a long time during one campaign developing a phone from home system because people love the idea of you can make calls from home for your candidate. Anyone can do it anywhere. Oh, great. I'm going to have 100,000 people that love my candidate make calls from Timbuktu into Iowa to call for my candidate. Except if there's not somebody there watching them, or if they don't have friends with them to help, gin up the spirit of making phone calls, they're not going to do it. So don't spend a lot of time getting a volunteer on your own call system set up. It's not going to happen. Might be a couple exceptions to that rule we'll talk about later. So how I see phone banking is of dubious effectiveness. There's little quality control over both volunteer and paid calls. And don't forget, calls made does not equal votes secured. A great example of this is on the right of my screen. Rand Paul, who, look, I'm personally a fan of, he was competition for me in Iowa while I was working for the Cruz campaign. The metric that Rand's campaign touted over and over again, and the Paul family are Iowa experts. His father has done very well there in his presidential campaigns in the past. Iowa voters can connect with a more libertarian Republican message very well. They trumpeted on their social media and in press releases over and over again about the number of calls they made. 300,000 calls made this month by their army of volunteers that they had that followed the Paul family. I forget what percent he got in Iowa, but there's him conceding, because they may have made 1 million phone calls into Iowa telephones, but the touch of having a phone call made does not equal a voter converted. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't like phone calls. We're going to talk about other methods of voter contact that they may not be exactly keen on. But phone calls is certainly one of them, especially if it's a 20-way Iowa caucus turnout operation, and they're getting a call from all 20 candidates saying, you got to vote for my guy and the other guy's terrible. About on the third or fourth one, they get sick and tired of it, and your calls are actually starting to get counterproductive. So there's a time for calling and there's a time not to call. I call it the court jester, because people can either appreciate or definitely not appreciate your mass phone calling. However, calls and call centers, even the paid calls where it's a volume thing, can be a cost-effective way to identify your supporters. That can just mean a paid call or a volunteer call that calls you, hey, who are you considering voting for in the upcoming primary election? If they say your candidate, you know that's a good house to go visit in person. Try to get a yard sign out front. Go make sure that they turn out. You can drive them with a turnout phone call as election day or early voting nears. And it's a little bit kind of amateur or grassroots polling. You can figure out if this person answers a phone call and says, well, I'm inclined to vote for Joe Schmo, not your guy. Well, you can know, maybe I need to go have a conversation with them in person about why my candidate or I am better. So phone calls definitely have their use, and they can be a low cost and high volume way to do something for the campaign. Cole, we got anyone?
Not. Let me save them up for a little bit, and you just keep on rolling.
Sure, good. I'm glad to get away from phone calls. So this is something I added in this morning, believe it or not, about texting. And so you can see a couple of images I gathered. Political text messaging has become very common in the last few cycles. If you're a Democrat voter, or if you're a longtime, forever and ever amen Republican voter like me, you probably got a Beto O'Rourke text in the 2018 cycle. I had a lot of fun going down that decision tree that you can see on your, and there's a swear word in there, I just noticed, ignore that. But going down that decision tree with the volunteer that's texting you, just to see what this texting stuff is like. It's something I've done many times. So it's evolved as a campaign tool over the last few cycles. And when you send them out in mass, tens of thousands at a time, they can be a cheap way to reach your supporters or find new potential voters. Texting, kind of like phone calls, can provide you with important information. And voters, if they choose to, can interact with your campaign and get provided localized information and messaging. So what that means is if Beto O'Rourke, and they did this pretty well, it was an experiment for sure, but they did this well. If Beto had either an event or a volunteer get together in Laredo, okay, which is usually not the site of all politics, okay, people rarely make trips to Laredo, they could text the 10,000, 30,000 people who were interested in Beto, who had interacted with Beto online stuff or whatever, and say, hey, look, we're going to be in Laredo, or there's a volunteer HQ event in Laredo tomorrow starting at 9 a.m. Be there. That's a great way to get people to know what is going on and to turn a 10 volunteer turnout into 150 volunteer turnout to where you can go block walk the city of Laredo in 1 week or whatever. So texts have their use, but I would say, like phone calls, despite their newness, texts are reaching a saturation point. I made the terrible mistake of not attending a Trump rally. That was fascinating. It's not necessarily everyone's cup of tea or my cup of tea, but I went to one, and on the screens they had a big text this and that and the other to text the word Trump to this number, and I joined that text list just to find out where it goes and how that tree evolves as far as them contacting me. And what it means is about twice a day I get a text from a Trump or Trump-related organization about this, that, and the other. It's not a lot of fun, but it's just kind of an organic thing I need to be aware of so I can follow how text messages evolve as a political professional. So they've reached a saturation point. Matt may disagree, Liz may disagree with me on that, but they are invasive. They go directly to your phone. You have to look at them essentially at least once, and they're not necessarily solicited. Even if you sign up for a list, that list can get sold and resold 10 times over, and you'll start hearing from people in other states, and it can get annoying. These two photos right here, obviously it's just an example of the mass volunteer texting program that Beto put into place that obviously did some good work for them. It made his campaign achieve 100% name ID rather quickly. And look, they got some great headlines. They got some bad headlines out of it. Everyone got that text message, including me. So it was just an interesting experiment that ended up, I think, being a net positive for his campaign. Another one I thought was funny. The United Australia Party, which if I recall is kind of a right-wing fringe party in Australia, sent out mass text messages to the voters of Australia, which, side note, the voters of Australia is everybody everybody over the age of 18. It's compulsory voting there. You get registered to vote, and you're by law technically supposed to have to vote in Australia. But they all got a text message that says, if you elect us to Parliament, we will get rid of mass text messaging. So they sent out a mass text message to get rid of mass text messaging. So dubious quality, lot of volume in text messaging, but it is another tool that could be at your disposal if you choose to use it. Move on to the next one. Campaign events. So this is stuff I have a lot of practice in. Let's first and foremost think of terms of maybe a state house race. Let's think of small time. Campaigns or events are a way to engage your supporters and specific sections of voters. They can raise in size from stadium rallies, if you're Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders more aptly, to in-home coffees with just a few voters. If you have a coffee in a certain neighborhood and they invite their neighbors who are inclined to vote for your candidate and a dozen people or 6 people show up, that can be a huge event for your local candidate, because they're going to have a dozen people get FaceTime with them. And those people are likely to convert to volunteers who do more work for your campaign, or they go tell their neighbors about your campaign, or you get them to walk their precinct with your materials. They become force multipliers. So every event, from big ones to little ones, can be important for your race, depending on how big it is. For the type of race I think we're going to talk about most often, it's going to range from local meetings to barbecues to local coffees, as I talked about. The events give your candidate time to engage with small groups, have one-on-one discussions, and talk with influential members of the community. And I will add, they're critical in rural districts where houses are spread out. You can't necessarily go do as much block walking in the time you have to do it. So when, name a rural focus group. I have 1,000 of them. I don't know why one doesn't come to mind. But when the Farm Bureau has their monthly meeting, your candidate should be at it if they have policy sympathetic to the Farm Bureau, because those folks vote, and they're all going to be at this one meeting at the VFW hall in the middle of nowhere. Go find those voters. Events can also be the lifeblood of keeping your candidate busy when they're not walking or raising money. They should be raising money, by the way. The more time they can spend with people engaged enough to attend, usually the better. To talk a little bit more about influential members of the community that you're running in, Chamber of Commerce, Lions Club, people who are civically involved, people who care about something that's going on in their community. When you go talk to them, those are the most important people you can talk to, because one, they're almost certainly voters, and two, they're interested in doing stuff to promote the politics that they like. So get your candidate to these meetings, get them some speaking time, do what it takes to get them speaking time, be there with your campaign stickers on, bring some more stickers for people. You want your candidate to appear to have momentum within their local community. More specifically, events hosted by interest groups, be it, the Texas Rifle Association, the National Rifle Association, if they have a local meeting, or LGBTQ meetings. Again, those are people that are focused on something that really matters to them. If your candidate identifies with those principles and goes and talks to those people about, hey, if you stand for this, I want to stand for you, it's going to pay big dividends for your campaign later. The LI rule that I have on the side of the screen, and it may be hard to see the picture because it's a little bit in the background. It's one of my favorite moments. If you weren't on the winning side, one of my favorite moments of the 2016 campaign is Senator Rubio, who had told people he was going to drop out, and then he decided not to drop out before the Florida primary, changed course, didn't show up to cut his deal with Senator Cruz and Senator Lee on joining forces against Donald Trump. He decided to have a rally in his hometown at a high school football stadium the day before, I believe it was, the Florida primary. And when you waffle on dropping out of the race or not, and you don't properly prepare your event, stuff like that, if you can see it happen, headlines like that happen. It was a little under 3 hours before a CNN debate. Marco Rubio had the headlines that about 500-ish, and that's including his staffers and supporters that were paid to be there, showed up to a football stadium, and it was the goofiest looking rally you've ever seen on any time. And when he was my opponent, I enjoyed that. Rule number 25, the mind can absorb no more than the seat can endure. So just keep in mind your voters, potential voters, when you're at an event, keep it pithy, because people don't want to be there for a couple hours. They want to have a conversation with you as quickly as they can, get your message out, and start talking one-on-one. Cole, should I pause there?
Let me ask you this, Tyler. Are you going to touch on social media, or say Facebook Live in some slides in the future?
Yes.
All right. In that case, Teresa, sounds like your question will be answered in the near future.
Actually, I'm sorry. Let's ask that one, because I talk about digital, but I'm not as COVID friendly in this presentation as I could be. So I think now is actually a good time to probably take that question.
Sure. Okay. In that case, Tyler, do you have any thoughts or advice on voter contact, through things like Facebook Live or other social media where a candidate can connect with voters?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's good. Do it. I'm going to talk about shooting a shotgun metaphorically at voters here in a little bit. And Cole, keep me steady on time here. Facebook Live can be a great way to reach thousands of people at a time, even, or down to just a couple if you're a local candidate. But you don't necessarily know who's going to tune in. It's usually people that are signed up to support the group, or they like your group or your Facebook page. So that's good to talk to. But something during COVID that we found useful is I have candidates that will fundraise or host events via Zoom. People are interested in getting some interaction with other human beings. That's why we're doing this right here. So I have candidates do a Zoom fundraiser where they have, a dozen people who are interested in a certain thing, come and just talk to them via Zoom, and it's paid dividends. So always do some live on Facebook, live on Twitter, Zoom calls with potential supporters, because it's a great way, especially during the COVID times, to reach people who are otherwise cooped up in their house. Yes, do those. It's a big part, especially now, of reaching the maximum amount of voters. So, okay, it is the next slide, digital outreach. And the photo here is obviously Beto O'Rourke, who, to some degree of effectiveness, obviously it worked out pretty well for him. He got close, had 1,000,001, if it was 10, campaign headquarters, volunteer headquarters. And it was just people who were interested in his campaign, starting their own, be it at a house or a little bit of office space or a library, starting a campaign headquarters where they were going to do campaign related activities. Digital outreach as a method of voter contact, it's still evolving, but it's become one of the most important things that your campaign must do, unless you're running for like precinct chair. If you've got a body of voters bigger than just a couple, you're going to want to do some digital outreach. And the amount of specificity, if I use that word right, that you can do via digital is very important these days. You can micro-target people that are interested in the most mundane of things, but they are really interested in it. A great example of this is in Iowa. We used our pollster, which is a big blanket approach, to find out what people are interested in. And something that kept bleeding through over and over again was there was a very small but very dedicated group of people in the state of Iowa that hated red light cameras. They hated the hell out of red light cameras. So a presidential campaign that has nothing to do with red light cameras and will probably never be able to touch your state's red light cameras. We knew that there were 300 people in the state of Iowa that their number one issue was those damned red light cameras that may or may not even have existed in Des Moines or wherever. And we sent them messaging, digital mail, etc., about red light cameras. We really hate red light. Ted Cruz hates red light cameras. Oh my God, we hate them so bad. Vote for us. And we did that through digital outreach and stuff like that. So it's a very important tool that can both be a broad approach on Facebook Live, or you micro-target ads to people who care about a very specific issue. Again, having a digital presence is now a necessity. If you're running for county commissioner or state rep or something even smaller than that, a local race, you want people to see that you're hip, that you're up with digital, that you've got a Twitter account that does some funny stuff, or just promote your campaign message. Got to have a Facebook, you got to have a Twitter at this point. You've got to do it. Email updates, which I know all of you get probably too many of, like I do, is a great way to keep people engaged, especially older voters. Still open those emails at a high rate, read them, send you $5, reply back to the mass email, even though probably nobody's ever going to read it. They're still engaged in that. And then one of the most important things you can do as a campaign staffer is keep adding to that email list, whether it's organically where you get an email at a door, or you have a sign-in sheet at your event. Bring a sign-in sheet and you collect their emails. You want to keep communicating with people via a almost free service that email is. So always be adding to your email list. And so we'll talk a little more about the rule up top, but beware counting digital efforts as real campaigning. It is real campaigning. It can be super effective. It can be so important as a force multiplier or a validator, as it was for Better or Work, that your campaign is new, it's exciting, it's engaged in ways that other people aren't. But the digital touches can be very light. If somebody sees your little banner ad, and I'm just doing a little light touch there, that's not going to convert a voter. If they click on it and read more, now you're starting to get towards the first step of converting them to be your voter. But don't think the digital advertising, text calls, all of that, they can be numerous, but they're just part of the game. Don't think because you reach somebody digitally that you're going to turn them out for your campaign. Cole, any questions on digital?
I think you covered the one we had, Tyler.
Cool. Let's see, how am I doing on time? What did I start at 11:30?
Somewhere around there. Yeah. We're getting a little short.
Okay, I'll move quickly. Television advertising, your giant metaphorical shotgun in search of voters. So TV at the levels we're normally going to talk about is expensive. It's hard to target, and it's very costly to produce, and requires repeat impressions to drive a message home. Again, Liz will do much better about this than I do. But if somebody sees your TV ad once, good luck. They're not going to remember. If you have just enough money to buy a couple of hits in prime time on one network for your race, don't do it. Spend that money somewhere else. Because you need to make an impression on TV. If you have a lot of money, it is a top or perhaps the best way to move a large group of voters, even to this day, is to go heavy on broadcast and cable television to talk to people about your campaign message. I say that right there. But think about who watches TV and what do we know about them. If you're watching over the air or cable television with a set-top box, or even YouTube TV and the more digital-based internet services for TV, it's more than likely you're an older voter. It's a good thing because those people turn out, but you got to think about what you're going to talk to them about when they do get to see your TV ad. So it's a question of resources, and TV ads, I say in quotes because I'm going to talk about a way to cheat to win, and cheating not in the bad sense of the word, can also be an effective way to raise money and grab attention for your campaign. Great example of this is a local example if you're here in Travis County. Gerald Doherty, older white guy. He was a county commissioner, recently retired in Travis County. How did he get a lot of international attention even for his campaign? Well, he made a TV ad that was only going to be shown on actual TV a couple times. That's not the important part. But he made a very funny TV ad that you can go look up about how his wife was desperately direct to camera asking you to go vote for Gerald, because if he doesn't have his job as a county commissioner, he's just going to sit and do the dishes and bother her at home about the price of gravel for the roads he needs to build. Please vote for Gerald is what she said. I need him out of the house. And it was a very funny, very unique ad that he may have spent $20,000 of his campaign money to put on TV a little bit, but he got many millions of dollars in free advertising, earned media, which we're going to talk about in a second, promoting that ad, people promoting it for him by saying, hey, look at this funny ad. It was the #1 watched ad of a political cycle nationwide, and he was running for Travis County Commission. So TV ads, in quotes, can mean more than one thing. It can be a tool to get your campaign more attention. Whether or not this TV ad, which can just be up on YouTube, is going to end up on TV or not. Radio, I'll move through this one quickly. It's an ancient tool. I still love the radio that's evolving for new audiences. For our purposes, radio means any political message that relies on audio first and foremost. This can be genuine radio, internet radio, podcasts. And while the audience for terrestrial radio, aka what you have in your car, or if you have a radio sitting around at home, those audiences shrunken dramatically. Those ad buys can still be effective. I still use terrestrial radio in Republican primary elections because Republican primary voters who are older love to listen to talk radio. They love to listen to Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity or whoever the heck is still on the radio these days. So the ad buys can still be effective for certain people. Just think about who it is that listens to the radio. Podcasts, they have exploded in popularity. Listeners search listeners are in search of different types of content, and it enables you to find a podcast that is aimed around, crime, or aimed around politics, the Ben Shapiro Show, or and a million and one different podcasts. So if you do some advertising on there, you know what ears you might be listening to. However, I'm not sure how many people listen to the Ben Shapiro Show in a Texas House district based in Odessa. So you've got to use these cost effectively to talk to specific people who have a specific brand of politics, and that's why they're listening to that podcast. Direct mail, which again, I believe Liz will cover, and she's the world's foremost expert in my mind on direct mail. But it's one of the most important, it's one of the most important methods of voter contact at district level and state and local races. Mail is critically important because you know exactly who might be looking at your ad. To go back to the question about Tarrant County, you have the voter list. You know who's likely to vote, and you know to some degree which party they're likely to vote for. So I do hundreds of thousands, sometimes per campaign, in dollars in mail every single cycle, because I know that here's a list of 10,000 very likely hardcore Republican primary voters. I'm going to hit their mailbox 10 times before early voting starts, or including during early voting, because I want them to see my candidate's face, name, and message over and over again. And when you're sorting through their mail, as people still do, and they see, oh, Jonathan Stickland sent me a mailer today. Might read it, might throw it out. Tomorrow, they're going to see another Jonathan Stickland mailer, and they're going to say, okay, let me take a look at this. How direct mail is done, Liz can discuss, we can discuss later, but just know that it's critically important because it's going directly to a mailbox for a household that you know is probably going to vote. Mass mail can also be cost effective if you have a printer and creator team who will work on a strict calendar. If you can space out know for a fact when these mailers are going to be, their design is going to be ready and sent to a printer, you can get a political message for 50 cents or less to eyes 50 cents or less to eyes that you know are going to look at it, versus spending several dollars per impression or even more per impression on TV and other mediums where you're just hoping people are tuned in and looking at it. So mass mail, it can get a little cluttered, but it's still a medium that people pay attention to. And if you send out interesting mail, and you can see in the background, there's some striking images in the mail, people are going to take a look at it and they're going to hopefully remember your name come voting time. Another tool is people who are engaged. You could send them direct mail that is specifically designed for them to take in the polling place with them. In Texas, you can't look at your phone or take pictures while you're in the polling place. But if you have a piece of paper or something that a campaign mailed to you, you can bring that into the voting booth with you and nobody can say anything about it. So direct mail, you can tailor it to a budget. You can tailor it to which segment of voters you're going to talk to, and you can really put stuff, cost-effective, cheap political advertising in their hands. Earned media, super important. It's the media that you earn rather than buy, and it's essentially free advertising for your campaign. When state, local, or national news produce something about your campaign, that's defined as earned media. And positive earned media is essential to spreading your campaign's message farther than it would normally go with the money that you have. So if you have a rally, if your candidate attends a rally to open up Texas, we're done with the pandemic, let's open up. Tell the media about this. Candidate so-and-so for this district is going to the Open Texas rally, and he's gonna say some stuff. And the local news will want to do an interview with him. And then that night, viewers who are likely to be voters are going to say, oh, Joe Schmo went to the Open Texas rally and he said some great stuff about how we need small business open. And that's obviously a Republican example. But you want to get as much of this as possible. You want to have a press list where you can reach out to members of the TV, print, news, online media and say, my candidate's doing this. You should say something about it. Here's a quote from us. And so the greatest example of this, unfortunately for somebody who was working for Senator Cruz in a presidential campaign, the greatest example of all time and perhaps forever is Donald Trump. And a great quote from an article in The Street, Emily Stewart, was Donald Trump received $5.6 billion throughout his campaign in free media. was more than Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and everyone else, by the way, combined. Donald Trump got so much media attention that even if he didn't have a campaign budget, which actually when you look at their spending, they didn't have much of a campaign budget. They traveled. Wherever his circus went, every single media member followed and reported it to a T. And look, it wasn't always stuff that as a political professional you would want to see up in lights about your candidate, but everybody knew who Donald Trump was. They knew where he was. They knew what he was talking about. And it is, in my opinion, the biggest reason why he's president of the United States today is because the media, who may not in the whole be big fans of his, gave him all the free coverage he could ever want and a lot more. So go get earned media from your campaign. Ask me during Q&A and during office hours how you do that for a local candidate. We'll talk more about that. So quickly, voter contact in your budget. Rule number 18, you can't save the world if you can't pay the rent, which I think you guys may have heard yesterday. Your goal is to win. So I need to talk about specifically nitty gritty. Your goal is to win. So you're going to want to maximize how much you spend on voter contact, which means you have to spend less money on other stuff. If you have a tight budget for your campaign, if you're giving campaign bonuses or t-shirts to your campaign workers, you're probably wasting your money. 1,000,001 things are going to affect the outcome of your race. But as a campaign manager or campaign staffer, you want to put as much of your budget as possible into the voter contact we've been talking about, 70% or more. This means you can try to avoid spending money on anything you can't really spend money on, because as number 40 says, one big reason is better than many little reasons. This is your giant cannon shot, voter contact. Spend all the money you can on it. So obviously this isn't necessarily live, but if anyone answers this question in the next few minutes, I'll Venmo you $10 if you can tell me the method of quote unquote voter contact that voters are obsessed with and candidates are obsessed with that we haven't discussed. So Cole, if somebody gives you the right answer, which I will text to you right now, let me know.
Jonathan, it's already popping up ideas. Let's see. Oh, Jonathan, you're done. That was it. That was quick.
Good. Well, Jonathan doubtless said yard signs. Yard signs accomplish nothing. I'm directing camera on this, okay? And too often your volunteers will think, if I go get a yard sign, I'm going to put it in my yard and look, I've done something for the campaign. I'll see you in a couple months when it's time to vote. For Beto, it's a great campaign to talk about. It was kind of a validator because in suburban neighborhoods that are reliably Republican, you all of a sudden saw a bunch of Beto signs and people thought, well, maybe it's okay if I vote for Beto too this time because gosh darn it, my neighbors are voting for him. So they're not completely pointless, but don't spend a lot of time on your campaign, whatever size it is, on yard signs because they're expensive, they're time consuming, and your supporters will go absolutely nuts for them and they will make it their entire world. Tip, if you're going to do yard signs, if you're in a yard sign election, make sure that the candidate and their spouse, woman, man, doesn't matter, they see their yard signs. If the candidate's wife or husband drives to work by a certain route every day, get some yard signs up on that route so they don't come back to campaign HQ and say, hey, why am I only seeing these yard signs on my way to work every day? We need to have some of our candidates' yard signs. Is it accomplishing anything? Not really, but you don't want the candidate's spouse in your grill about yard signs. So $10 to you, Jonathan, I believe it was. Yard signs exist. If your opponent does them, you probably want to do them yourself, but they're a very dubious value. So cheating to win is a nice thing. Don't ever cheat. Voter fraud is bad. It's real. Don't do it. And how to win a campaign. So make your campaign as volunteer-centric as possible. The first thing you want to do when you decide that you're going to have a campaign or you're going to manage a campaign is find your early network of friends and family for both you, the candidate, and their family, and deploy them first and foremost to get more volunteers. So find people who are dedicated about the campaign because it's their money, their time, their treasure, their blood involved in this campaign, and get them to go get a network of people who will consistently volunteer for the campaign. The most important voter contact you will do is getting your networks and your candidates' networks to come work for you for free. Give people buy-in. Rule number 6 of these LI rules, give them a title and get them involved. If you have somebody who's not really a people person, that's your delivery driver for those yard signs if you have to have them. That's a shelf stalker at HQ. That's a candidate driver, somebody who can get everyone who can do a process and get them to do that process well. If somebody's not a people person, don't send them to go walk doors, because they'll either lie to you and stay in their car and listen to music, or they'll do doors poorly. Get people to do what they're good at. If you have a volunteer who's very good on the doors, a great communicator, they're dedicated, make them the volunteer director. Give them a title and get them involved. And remember, campaigns are hard. Some campaigns can be run by first-time and naive self-funding candidates who are going to blow $1 million on stuff that they don't need, but most of them are not. Most campaigns are run by people of various means, middle-class people with a family who will put their very souls into the race. So if you're working on a campaign as a job, good for you. If it's a cause for you, it's someone you believe in, that's even better. In general, if your campaign staff are going to be underpaid, overworked, and you're going to daydream about sleep, but when the campaign's over, win or lose, you're not going to be afraid of that stuff anymore. You're going to be afraid of a lot anymore, because you'll work harder than you've ever worked before. And every other challenge in life will kind of pale in comparison to when you were on that presidential campaign or when you ran a campaign for state rep. Other things to remember, 2 more rules. Nothing in politics moves unless it's pushed. Don't expect people to do something just because they're supposed to do it. Check in with them. Watch them in person, especially. And moral outrage is the most powerful motivating force in politics. We already talked about this. Get people a cause. For Beto O'Rourke, it was, "I'm not Ted Cruz," and that turned out to be a pretty powerful message. But he also had politics to promote. But moral outrage, the big reason, is better than lots of little reasons why your candidate should be elected. So thankfully, I'm sure you're all saying it's time for any more questions that we have time for. I'll say it again, Democrat, Republican, or whatever in between. We're here to help. Your mentors or panelists for this weekend. I'm here to help. I've helped put a lot more Democrats into offices and campaign jobs than Republicans. I want people to get involved. It's exciting. It's kind of hard to express via Zoom the intricacies and realities of campaigning. I hope I've done a decent enough job at doing that. And this boot camp is just a jumping off point for you to ask more questions of all of us and to get involved. And so, going forward, just find a campaign you're passionate about and start working hard. If you're good at it or you work hard at it, everything else tends to take care of itself. Campaigns are beautiful in that they're at least partially a meritocracy. If you're willing to do the work, you can find a career in this, or you can find a lot of fulfillment in this. My number, my email, all of that stuff. I think my Twitter was at the beginning of the campaign. Send me questions, do it all. And Cole, you can cut me off when we're out of time. It may be now, but I'll take any more questions.
Well, let me say to our panelists, if y'all need to run, grab lunch, get out of here, unplug for a minute, please go ahead. We have a few questions that I'm going to pose to Tyler, but our next session starts at 1 p.m. So we've got a pretty small window between now and then. Refresh if you need to. I'm going to post these questions to Tyler, but unplug if that's what you'd like to do. Tyler, I also want to let you know that our winner asked for a donation to the MN Freedom Fund.
Uh-oh.
Yep.
The which fund?
MN Freedom Fund.
I'll have to find out what that is. We might have to compromise on what I'm donating to, but a promise is a promise, so we'll work it out.
Yeah. We had a question about media. It's a 2-part question. I'm going to combine 2 questions that we were asked. One in regard to if any media, addressing scandals. How do you address scandal when working with voters? And also, is all media good media, or is there bad media? And I think those two lend themselves to each other. I wanted to pose you.
Unless you're Donald Trump, there is such thing as bad media. So to a degree, yes, there's always bad media. Scandals, depends. If it's your opponent's scandal, if there's a way to talk about it, it doesn't look bad for your candidate, maybe you should go talk about it. It depends on what it is. If your campaign has a crisis, a personal issue, a financial issue, or an issue that's created by your opponent that you feel isn't fairly being portrayed, get your message together on that over the course of an evening and get a response out. The problem is media outlets are going to publish what they know, and sometimes what they like to know. They're going to publish what they know, and they're going to publish it at least once, probably twice, in short order. And you're going to want your response to show up quickly in those. So tell the truth, figure out what the truth is, and start telling the truth. People like to see candidates that fess up to things big and small. But I mean, it's hard to answer that question without knowing what a specific quote unquote scandal might be. But try to tell the truth to get over said scandal as quickly as possible. You don't want the media cycle to be dominated by your quote unquote scandal. And first and foremost, there are a couple Texas politics examples of recent where people failed to do this over the course of months, and it cost them everything. Don't fall into your opponent's trap when they want you to lie. If you've done something bad, and there could be evidence that you've done something bad, don't go out and say that you haven't done something bad. Don't necessarily go and admit to a mistake if there isn't evidence out there. Again, it depends on what this stuff is. But tell the truth and try not to make the mistakes in the first place.
A great answer, Tyler. I really appreciate that and being candid about it. Awesome. With that, ladies and gentlemen, please reach out to Tyler on Slack. He will be there on Monday at 1 p.m. for sure. He may be hanging around this weekend. Either way around, grab that Slack channel. And if we missed your question, I apologize, but pose them to Tyler on Slack.
Please do.
At 1 p.m., everyone, we'll be back with Liz Chatterton, who I enjoy talking on the phone with. I think talking on the phone with Liz is amazing. She is
best presentation of boot camp. Stay around for Liz's presentation. It's the best one. It's
incredible. Y'all are going to enjoy it. Until then, run over to our website to find our worksheets. We have our toolkit there as well. Please submit your worksheets on our website. They're due Tuesday at midnight. Until then, we will see y'all at 1 p.m. with Liz Chatterton.